The silence of our house at midnight had always been a comfort, a thick, downy blanket woven from the threads of a life well lived. It was the sound of contentment, of two children sleeping soundly in their beds, of a mortgage mostly paid, of 15 years of shared history settling into the foundations like sturdy, reliable stone. I had always found solace in that quiet, in the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the whisper of the wind through the old oak tree in our front yard. Tonight, however, the silence was a void. It was hollow and sharp, an absence that screamed louder than any noise. John wasn't in our bed. I'd woken from a dream I couldn't quite grasp, my hand reaching across the cool expanse of sheets to find nothing but emptiness. It wasn't entirely unusual. John was a restless sleeper, often getting up for a glass of water or to stare out at the moonlit garden he so meticulously tended. But there was a different quality to his absence this time. A feeling, sharp and primal, prickled at the back of my neck. I sat up, listening. The house was still, but the silence felt wrong. It was a held breath, a pause before a thunderclap. I slipped out of bed, my bare feet cold against the hardwood floor. The soft glow of a nightlight in the hallway guided my way past our children's rooms. I paused at each door, a ritual I'd performed 1,000 times. Sophie, our 12-year-old, was a lump under a mountain of blankets, her breathing a soft, rhythmic puff. Liam, at 8, was sprawled diagonally across his bed, one arm flung over his head in a gesture of absolute surrender to sleep. They were safe. They were peaceful. Their existence was the bedrock of my own, the one unshakable truth in my world. He wasn't in the kitchen, nor in his study where he sometimes worked late, sketching out designs for the custom furniture he built. The living room was dark and empty, the ghosts of our family's laughter still hanging in the air from the movie we'd watched earlier. A knot of unease began to tighten in my stomach. This was more than a midnight ramble. Something was amiss. It was then that I saw it. A sliver of cold, artificial light bleeding from under the door that led to the garage. A low, rhythmic sound, almost too deep to be audible, vibrated through the floorboards. It was a sound of profound pain, a guttural, tearing sound that the human body only makes when it's being ripped apart from the inside out. My heart hammered against my ribs. My first thought was injury. Had he fallen? Trapped himself under a piece of equipment? I threw the door open, my mind racing through a panic checklist of first aid and emergency numbers. The scene that met my eyes stopped my breath in my throat. The garage, usually a chaotic but organized symphony of sawdust, tools, and half-finished projects, was cast in the stark, unforgiving light of a single bare bulb. And there, in the middle of the cold concrete floor, sat my husband, my John, the man who was my rock, my anchor, the steady, unflappable center of my universe. He was folded in on himself, his broad shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs. He wasn't just crying. He was weeping with an agony so complete it seemed to have hollowed him out. He was my husband, the man who had held me through the grief of my mother's passing, who had calmly stitched up Liam's split chin on our kitchen table, who had never, in 15 years, shown me a moment of weakness that wasn't tempered by resolve. Seeing him like this, so utterly broken and vulnerable, was like watching a mountain crumble into dust. John! My voice was a raw whisper, swallowed by the cavernous space. He didn't look up. His head was buried in his hands, his fingers tangled in his dark hair. He was rocking slightly, a primitive, self-soothing motion. On the floor beside him lay a small, tarnished silver box, its lid open. A few yellowed newspaper clippings and a single, faded photograph were scattered on the concrete. I knelt in front of him, the cold of the floor seeping through my thin pajama pants. I reached out a tentative hand and touched his shoulder. He flinched, a violent, full-body shudder, as if my touch had burned him. John, honey, what is it? What's wrong? Are you hurt? My mind was still clinging to the rational, the explainable. An accident. Bad news about a distant relative. Financial trouble. Anything but this. This raw, nameless despair was a language I didn't understand. He finally lifted his head, and the face he showed me was one I had never seen before. It was the face of a stranger. His eyes, normally a warm, gentle hazel, were bloodshot and swimming in a sea of torment. His face was pale, waxen, etched with lines of a grief so ancient it seemed to have been carved into his bones. "Anna," he rasped, his voice shredded. He looked at me, but it felt like he was looking through me, at a ghost standing right behind my shoulder. "Talk to me?" I pleaded, my own voice starting to tremble. "Please just talk to me. Whatever it is, we can fix it. We can face it together." A sound escaped his lips, a bitter, broken laugh that was more horrifying than his sobs. "Fix it?" he whispered, shaking his head slowly. "You can't fix this. No one can." My eyes fell to the scattered items on the floor. I picked up the photograph. It was a picture of a young woman, maybe in her early 20s. She had a wide, brilliant smile and eyes that sparkled with life, even in the faded, dog-eared print. She was beautiful. My heart constricted with a sudden, ugly suspicion. An old flame? A lost love? Was this a monument to a life he wished he'd had instead of the one with me? The thought was a shard of ice in my gut. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice colder now. He stared at the picture in my hand, and a fresh wave of agony washed over his face. "Her name was Clara," he said, the name a lead weight on his tongue. "Clara Jensen." The name meant nothing to me. I looked at the newspaper clippings. They were old, dated from over 17 years ago. The headlines were stark. "Local woman killed in tragic hit and run. Police search for driver of blue sedan. Family pleads for justice for daughter." My blood ran cold. I stared from the smiling face of the woman in the photo to the grim headlines, and then to the shattered man in front of me. The pieces were there, jagged and terrifying, but my mind refused to put them together. Couldn't. It was an equation too monstrous to solve. "John, what is this?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Why do you have these?" He finally looked me in the eye, and what I saw there was a confession. It was a plea and a damnation all in one. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the kind a man takes before stepping off a cliff. "Because I never thought I'd see my husband like this," he began, his voice a monotone, as if reciting a script he had rehearsed in his nightmares for years. "And his secret, my secret, is unbearable." He was quoting me. The words I'd just thought, the framework of my fear. The absurdity of it was dizzying. "Stop it, John. Just tell me." He closed his eyes. "The first thing you have to understand, Anna, the most important thing is that the man you married doesn't exist." I stared at him, uncomprehending. "What are you talking about? Are you having some kind of breakdown? Should I call someone?" "No," he said, his voice gaining a sliver of its old strength. But it was a strength born of resignation, not resolve. "I'm not John Carmichael. I never was." The world tilted on its axis. The garage, the house, the life we had built, it all seemed to flicker, like a badly projected film. "What?" "My name," he said, each word a stone he was forcing from his throat, "is Thomas Riley. I was born in a small town in Oregon you've never heard of. I haven't seen my family in 17 years. They probably think I'm dead." Thomas Riley. The name was alien. It felt wrong in the space between us. I looked at his face, the face I had woken up next to for 15 years, the face I had kissed goodnight and good morning, the face of my children's father. And for the first time, I saw the ghost of someone else there. A stranger. "I don't understand," I stammered, the photograph of the dead woman feeling heavy and damning in my hand. 17 years ago," he began, his gaze fixed on a point on the far wall. "I was 22 years old. I was stupid, arrogant. I thought the world belonged to me. I was at a party, I'd had too much to drink. Way too much. My girlfriend at the time, we had a fight. A stupid, meaningless fight. I stormed out. I got in my car. A blue sedan." He paused, and the words from the headline screamed in my mind. "Police search for driver of blue sedan." Oh God, no. It was raining. he continued, his voice hollow. The roads were slick. I was driving too fast, angry and drunk and just reckless. I was on a back road, heading out of town. I remember being blinded by the headlights of an oncoming car. I swerved. He choked on the next words, his body convulsing with a dry sob. There was a sound, a sickening thud. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding across the wet asphalt. I looked in my rearview mirror, and I saw her, lying on the side of the road. He pointed a trembling finger at the photograph in my hand. Clara Jensen. She had been walking home. Her car had broken down a mile back. I felt a wave of nausea so profound I had to put a hand on the floor to steady myself. The air in the garage was thick, unbreathable. I was drowning in it. I should have stopped, he whispered, his voice cracking with self-loathing. I should have gotten out. I should have called for help. A decent human being would have done that. But I wasn't a decent human being. I was a coward. I sat there for a second, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. All I could think about was my life being over. Prison. Disgracing my family. All of it. And so I did the unthinkable. The unforgivable. He finally looked at me, his eyes begging for something: absolution, condemnation. I couldn't tell. I hit the gas, Anna. I drove away. I left her there to die on the side of a wet road in the middle of the night. The words landed in the silence of the garage like stones dropping into a deep, dark well. Each one sent out ripples that distorted everything I had ever known. Our first date, when he'd told me he was an orphan who'd moved around a lot. Our wedding day, when he'd cried and said he'd never known a love like mine. The birth of Sophie, when he'd held her tiny body against his chest and sworn he would always protect her. Lies. All of it built on the body of a dead woman. I drove for 2 days straight, fueled by nothing but terror and caffeine. He went on, the confession now a torrent. I ended up in a motel 1,000 miles away. I saw the news report. They said she was a nursing student, that she was beloved by everyone, that her family was destroyed. They also said she might have survived if help had arrived sooner. That last sentence was the one that broke me. It wasn't just a tragic accident. His cowardice had been the fatal blow. The possibility of her survival stolen by his fear. I destroyed my ID. I sold the car for scrap. I took what little cash I had and I just disappeared. I became John Carmichael. I practiced the name, the backstory over and over until it felt real. I got a job in construction, kept my head down. And then, a couple of years later, I met you. He looked at me, a desperate hope flickering in the depths of his despair. You were my redemption, Anna. You and the kids. You were the one good, pure thing in my life. I thought if I could be a good husband, a good father, if I could build a life of love and integrity, that maybe, just maybe, it could somehow atone for what I did. That I could outrun the ghost of Thomas Riley. My soul felt like it was fracturing, tiny hairline cracks spreading through my very being. The man I loved was a construct, fiction. The foundation of our life, our family, our home, wasn't stone. It was sand, built over a hidden grave. The love I felt for him was real, but what was it attached to? A man named John who built furniture and loved his family, or a man named Thomas who had left a woman to die? Were they even different people? For 15 years, it almost worked, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. I buried him. I buried Thomas so deep I almost forgot he was there. But he never really went away. He was always there in the nightmares. On the anniversary, every time I looked at Sophie, I saw Clara. The life she never got to have. Why now? I finally managed to ask, my own voice a stranger's. After all this time, why is it all coming up now? He reached a shaking hand into the pocket of his jeans and pulled out a crumpled envelope. It was a simple white business envelope with no return address. My name and address were typed on the front. It came in the mail 3 days ago, he said. I found it before you did. He handed it to me. My fingers felt numb as I took it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. On it was a typed message, just 5 words. I know who you are. Beneath the words was a recent photo, clearly taken with a long lens. It was of him, John Thomas, pushing Liam on the swing set in our backyard. He was smiling. The picture was a terrifying violation, a predator's eye view of our sanctuary. The silence that followed was heavier than anything that had come before. It was the silence of a life sentence being handed down. The past he had run from had finally caught up, and it was threatening to swallow not just him, but all of us. Our children, our home, everything. I looked from the threatening note to the picture of the dead girl, to the face of my husband, a man I suddenly didn't know at all. The love, the trust, the security, it all evaporated, leaving behind a cold, terrifying vacuum. My soul didn't just break. It felt like it was being meticulously disassembled, piece by agonizing piece, by the man I had promised to love and cherish for all my days. He had built me a beautiful house of lies, and it had just come crashing down on top of us. He saw the utter devastation in my eyes, the complete shattering of my world. He seemed to shrink, all the fight draining out of him, leaving only a husk of shame. He opened his mouth, his expression one of pure, bottomless despair. He knew that what he had already told me was an ending. But the story wasn't over. There was one more piece, one more blow to land. What he said next, I would later think, replaying the moment in the endless, sleepless nights that followed, changed our marriage forever. Because what he said, his voice barely a tremor in the ruins of our life, was, "That's not all, Anna. The man who sent that letter, I know who he is. It's Clara's brother. And he's been watching us for months." The chasm that had opened between us in the garage didn't close when we re-entered the house. It widened, deepened. It followed us up the stairs, a silent, ravenous entity that consumed the air and leached the warmth from our home. The house itself felt different, as if the walls were aware of the lie they'd been sheltering. The family photos on the wall seemed to mock me, portraits of a life that had never been real. Each smiling image of John F. Thomas was now a mask, and I could suddenly see the strain around his eyes, the subtle tension in his smile that I had always misinterpreted as simple camera shyness. We didn't sleep. How could we? We sat at the kitchen table, the one he had built with his own hands, its sturdy oak surface now feeling as fragile as glass. The sun had not yet risen, and the world outside was cloaked in a blue-black darkness that perfectly mirrored the abyss in my chest. He had told me everything, a torrent of confession that had lasted until the first hint of dawn. He spoke of his family, the Rileys, a mother and father and younger sister he had effectively erased from his life with his cowardly flight. He told me about the constant, low-grade paranoia that had been his companion for 17 years, the way he avoided official documents, his refusal to be in photographs that might end up online, his vague, rehearsed answers about his past. All the little oddities that I had woven into the tapestry of the man I loved, explaining them away as endearing quirks, were suddenly revealed to be the desperate measures of a fugitive. His humble beginnings were not a point of pride, but a fabrication. His lack of old friends wasn't because he was a private man, but because he couldn't risk a single link to his past. The man sitting across from me was a ghost. He wore my husband's face, he spoke with my husband's voice, but the person I had shared my life with was an elaborate, meticulously crafted performance. And I had been his most devoted and most deceived audience. "Mark Jensen," he said, his voice raw from talking and crying. "That's her brother's name. When it first happened, he was all over the news, begging for someone to come forward. He was relentless. He hired a private investigator years ago, never gave up. I guess the PI finally earned his money." "He's been watching us for months?" I asked, the words feeling like sandpaper in my throat. The image of the photographer of our son, our innocent child, viewed through a predator's lens made my skin crawl. Our sanctuary had been breached. "I've felt it," he admitted, shamefaced. "For a while now. A car parked at the end of the street for too long. The feeling of being watched at the grocery store. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the guilt was making me see things. But it was real. He was getting close. The letter was just him letting me know the game was over. My mind, numb with shock, began to stir, the protective instincts of a mother overriding the shattered heart of a wife. What does he want? The police? Money? Thomas shook his head, his face a mask of dread. If he wanted the police, he would have gone to them. He would have sent them an anonymous tip with the photo. This is personal. He doesn't want justice, Anna. He wants revenge. He wants to dismantle my life, the way he thinks I dismantled his. The life he was talking about wasn't just his. It was mine. It was Sophie's. It was Liam's. This man, Mark Jensen, a man consumed by a righteous and terrible grief, was now a threat to my children. A raw, feral anger began to burn through the fog of my despair. How dare he? How dare Thomas bring this danger to our door, to the lives of our innocent children? All because he was too much of a coward to face the consequences of his actions 17 years ago. So what happens now? I demanded, my voice hard, devoid of the sympathy he so desperately craved. Do we wait for him to show up at the door? Do we pack a bag and run just like you did before? Is that the plan, Thomas? To turn our children into fugitives, too? The use of his real name was a slap, and he flinched. No, he said, his voice cracking. No, I won't do that to you. Or to them. This ends with me. The sun began to rise, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and orange. A beautiful, cruel mockery of the darkness that had enveloped our world. The alarm on my phone went off, signaling the start of a normal day that was anything but. We had to get the kids ready for school. We had to perform the pantomime of our life, of the family we were pretending to be. The next few hours were the most excruciating performance of my life. I moved on autopilot, a hollowed-out automaton of a mother. I made pancakes, my hands moving through the familiar motions of mixing batter and flipping them on the griddle. The smell, usually a comforting aroma of home, was nauseating. Liam came bounding into the kitchen, a whirlwind of 8-year-old energy. Dad, are you going to help me with my Pinewood Derby car after school? It has to be the fastest ever. Thomas, who had dark circles under his eyes so pronounced they looked like bruises, forced a smile that didn't reach his haunted eyes. You bet, buddy. The fastest in the history of Cub Scouts. Sophie, ever perceptive, slid into her seat at the table and eyed us both suspiciously. Are you guys okay? You look weird. Just tired, sweetie? I said, my voice unnaturally bright. Your dad and I were up late talking. About what? She pressed, her 12-year-old mind missing nothing. Boring adult stuff, Thomas said, his attempt at levity falling flat. Taxes, mortgages, the thrilling world of fiscal responsibility. He was still trying to protect them, to maintain the facade. But the lie was a poison, and I could feel it seeping into every interaction, tainting every word. As I packed their lunches, my hands trembled. I was placing an apple and a sandwich into the lunchbox of a little boy whose entire world, whose very name was predicated on a lie. The Carmichaels. We weren't the Carmichaels. We were a fiction. After we'd waved them off on the school bus, the silence returned, but it was different now. It was no longer a void. It was thick with unspoken questions and the looming presence of Mark Jensen. I turned to face my husband, the stranger. I need to think, I said, my voice flat. I'm going for a walk. Don't follow me. I walked for hours with no destination in mind. The crisp autumn air did nothing to clear my head. My thoughts were a tangled, chaotic mess. Part of me wanted to scream, to rage at him for the monumental deception that had been my life. He had stolen my consent to our marriage, to our family. I had married John Carmichael, a good, simple man. I had not agreed to marry Thomas Riley, a man running from a manslaughter charge. Every memory was now corrupted. Our wedding vows a mockery. The loving reassurances he'd given me over the years, now sounding like the desperate incantations of a man trying to convince himself. Not me. But then, another part of me, a part one was ashamed of, felt a flicker of something else. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It was a terrible, tangled knot of pity and a stubborn, residual love. I thought of the man I knew, the one who read to our children every night, who held me when I was sick, who patiently taught Liam how to ride a bike, who looked at Sophie with a pride that was breathtaking to behold. That man was real. His love for us was real. It was the only thing I was sure of. He had done a monstrous thing as a young man, a cowardly, unforgivable thing. But had he spent the next 17 years trying to be a better man? Or was that, too, just part of the cover-up? I found myself in a small park, sitting on a bench overlooking a playground. I watched the mothers push their children on the swings, their faces relaxed and happy. They lived in a world that made sense, a world built on truth. My world had been a mirage, and it had dissolved at my feet. What were my options? I could leave him, take the children and run. But where would we go? And how could I explain it to them? I'm sorry, kids, but Daddy isn't who he says he is, and his past is coming to kill us. The thought was absurd, horrific. I could call the police. I could be the righteous, law-abiding citizen and turn in the fugitive I'd been sleeping next to for 15 years. But that would mean sending the father of my children to prison. It would mean their lives would be blown apart, their father branded a criminal, their family a source of scandal and shame. I couldn't do that to them. I loved them more than I loved my own sense of moral clarity. That was the soul-breaking truth of it. My soul wasn't just broken by his lie. It was being broken by the choices I now had to make. To protect my family, I would have to become complicit in his crime. I would have to choose my family over the memory of Clara Jensen, over the justice her family had been denied for so long. The weight of that choice was crushing. It was the weight of a life. When I finally returned home, the house was quiet. I found him in his workshop in the garage, the scene of the crime, both past and present. He wasn't crying anymore. He was standing by his workbench, his hand resting on a half-finished rocking horse he was making for a client. He looked up when I entered, his face etched with a terrible, waiting stillness. He was giving me all the power, ready to accept any judgment I handed down. I spent years, he said softly, not looking at me but at the wood grain under his hand, trying to build things that were solid, things that were true. This wood, it doesn't lie. It is what it is. I thought if I surrounded myself with enough honest things, I could become one of them. He finally turned to me, his eyes full of a despair so profound it made my own anger feel small. But the rot was inside me the whole time, and now it's spread to you. I walked towards him, my steps heavy. I stopped a few feet away, the space between us charged with 17 years of secrets. The man I married, I began, my voice trembling but clear, would never have put his children in danger. The man I married would have found a way to protect them from this. He visibly deflated, taking my words as the condemnation they were. I know, he whispered. I'm so sorry, Anna. I'll do whatever you want. If you want me to leave, I'll go. If you want me to turn myself in, I'll do it right now. Just tell me what to do to keep you and the kids safe. And that was the moment everything shifted. In his complete and utter surrender, in his willingness to face any punishment to protect us, I saw a flicker of the man I thought I knew. Not the coward who ran, but the man who would stand his ground for his family. The problem was, he had waited 17 years too long. Running is not an option, I said, the decision forming in my mind, hard and cold as steel. And you turning yourself in. Mark Jensen won't let it be that simple. He doesn't want the police. He wants you. He wants to watch you suffer. A car I didn't recognize, a dark, nondescript sedan, drove slowly past our house. We both saw it. It didn't stop, but the message was clear. He was here. He was watching. The time for deliberation was over. My marriage to John Carmichael was over. It had died on the concrete floor of the garage. But my children's lives were not. My responsibility to them was absolute. And in that moment, a new, terrible partnership was forged in the ruins of our old one. It wasn't a marriage of love and trust anymore. It was an alliance of survival. I looked at my husband, at Thomas Riley, and he saw the change in my eyes. He saw the fire of a she-bear protecting her cubs ignite where the soft glow of a loving wife had been. What he said next changed our marriage forever, I had thought. But it wasn't just his words. It was my response. It was the choice I made in that workshop, surrounded by the honest wood and the dishonest man. "Here's what we're going to do," I said, my voice low and steady. A general laying out a battle plan. "You are going to tell me every single detail you remember about that night. Every detail about Clara, about her family, about Mark. We are not going to be the prey. We are not going to wait for him to make a move. We are going to face him." He stared at me, a flicker of hope warring with his confusion. "Face him? Anna, he's dangerous." "And so am I," I said, the words tasting strange and powerful on my tongue. "He's threatening my children. You brought this disaster to our door, Thomas. But we are going to face it together. Not as John and Anna Carmichael, the happy couple from the suburbs, but as two people with everything to lose, who will do anything to protect their family." My soul was broken, yes, but in the cracks, something new and hard and fiercely protective was beginning to grow. Our marriage of lies was over. A new, terrifying covenant had begun. One forged in fear and sealed with a desperate, shared secret. And as I looked at the man who had destroyed my world, I knew with chilling certainty that I would help him fight the monster at our door, because his fight was now inextricably mine. The future was a dark, unknown territory, but we were going to walk into it together, not as lovers, but as co-conspirators. And that, I realized, was a bond of its own, terrifying and unbreakable.